The new Silverado has been quite controversial, so we're going to talk about common problems with the Silverado and the overall reliability, and then I will give you guys practical advice if you're looking to buy one of these in terms of the packaging so you can buy the best possible truck. I'll include a link to the Jerry Steiner and Salt Lake's website in the description down below. They're providing us with this truck. Let's get into it. There are 4 powertrain options available for the Silverado. The first is a turbo 2.7 liter 4-cylinder. Now, the newest iterations on this powertrain have been more reliable, but this powertrain has suffered from some issues like carbon buildup at pretty low mileage. And I mean, you got to remember, this is a 4-cylinder turbo in a full-size pickup truck, so it's just going to be under a lot of stress in general. It's not a horrible powertrain, but it will potentially come with some issues, especially at higher mileage. Now, the next is a 5.3 liter V8, and I'm actually going to also lump this in with the 6.2 liter V8, which this particular truck happens to have the 6.2 V8. Both of these powertrains can have the famous lifter problem that has been massively impacting GM, but it seems like the 6.2 seems to have more issues than the 5.3. The 5.3s seem to be able to hit higher mileage more reliably rather than the 6.2s. I've seen a bunch of these 6.2s fail at sub 10,000 miles. I talked to a lot of people, this is why I know this. And so it seems like between the two, the 5.3, although not as exciting because it doesn't have as much power, seems to be more reliable than the 6.2 at this point. And then finally, you've got the 3-liter turbo diesel Baby Duramax. Like most modern diesels, this powertrain can have some issues with the emission system, and hopefully we have some legislation that can kind of change the diesel emissions so we don't have super unreliable diesels. But anyways, that's a topic for another day. The other problem is people just not driving the diesel enough. If you just get in the truck, turn it on, drive down the road, turn it off, you're going to have issues. The system's going to get clogged up. You need to put a lot of miles on the powertrain on a regular basis. So if you're not regularly driving, 30 to 50 plus miles on a weekly, and even I would say, weekly basis, you're probably going to have issues with the system getting clogged up. So the diesel's a great powertrain. It can actually be pretty darn reliable. You just have to be able to drive it long distances without turning it on and off all the time. Wait, there's more powertrain stuff. We've got the transmissions, the 8-speed and the 10-speed. The 8-speed seems to be more problematic. I think that's why GM is kind of phasing it out. Just failures in general. The 10-speed also has its own problems. Ford and GM co-developed that transmission, and well, they are trying to figure out how to make it more reliable. Now, at this point in the video, you'll probably understand why GM has been so controversial over the last few years, because they've had some powertrain issues. Now, not every single vehicle with these powertrains are blowing up. There's plenty of people that have had great success with these vehicles, but enough for having issues that, well, you guys all know about it at this point. And the reason why GM has a much worse reputation right now than Ford with this whole situation is, although they share a transmission, they don't share powertrains. So Ford isn't really having engine issues right now. They're having transmission issues, whereas GM is having engine and transmission issues. So you can see how that kind of multiplies things. I'm trying to hit 500,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I'd really appreciate it if you'd help out with that. Now, when it comes to the rest of the Silverado, this is kind of the tragic part of the situation. It's actually pretty darn reliable. Chevy still uses leaf springs, which are very reliable, and then they also have great shocks with most of their trucks. This one has multimatic shocks, for example, which are known for their durability. Something to note, the standard shocks you see in most Silverado are the Rancho. Not the best performance, but they seem to be relatively durable. So instead of showing you guys all the stuff that's reliable, the one thing that can happen is just paint defects. This is something I'll have to mention in all these videos because every single modern car is having issues with the painting process. But yeah, surprisingly, people aren't really having issues with these multi-pro tailgates or even the full power tailgate that is powered down and up. And the interiors on these trucks are actually holding up quite well. It seems like they're not really having premature fade or wear issues. And I couldn't really find a lot with the heated and cooled seat function. Some manufacturers have issues with that, but it seems like GM is not really having a problem there. But there is something they are having a problem with, and that is this. Not the sound, but the screens. But I will say this sound is pretty nice. Listen. As long as the lifters are intact, the 6.2 is pretty cool. So there have been issues with the gauge cluster just not turning on. I've actually had this happen when I've been reviewing new GM products where this just is completely black. You turn on the car and it doesn't turn on. It usually happens when it's really cold or really hot. It's just kind of a screen thing, and that's one of the downsides about going to full digital. And I'd like to show this to you, but you can see device still starting. This is another downside with these modern things, is everything has to load up, and sometimes it takes a century and a half. But I will say, even though the screen's still loading up, if I put the truck in reverse, at least the backup camera function still pops on. Basically, there have also just been general electrical issues where, again, screen in the center doesn't work. Now, the Silverado doesn't have a bunch of major functions built in the screen, like, for example, the headlights are separate. The heads-up display controls are separate. The drive line is separate. The climate controls are all separate, so if this doesn't start up, there's still quite a bit that you can use. The same can't be said for a lot of other Chevy models, like the new Colorado, for example. If you want to turn the headlights on or off, that's in the screen. So if your screen fails, whatever you have that set at, that's what it's going to be set at. So yeah, just general electrical issues with these systems not working. This has actually been pretty commonplace. Most of the time, people just have to take it to the dealer, have the system reset, and sometimes there can be a parasitic drain where these systems glitch out and they just pull a bunch of power from the battery, and so then your battery dies, and that can cause its own issues within the vehicle where you just have to get everything completely factory reset. So yeah, this tech stuff, they figured out a lot of stuff. It's better than what it was, you know, back in 22 when this was first released, but there's definitely more that Chevy has to work out with this whole infotainment system gauge cluster setup. So let's take this out for a quick spin, and I'll give you guys some practical advice on the truck, what to order and all of that. Well, let's give some practical advice, and the screen is still not started up. So I think I'm proving my point with some of this tech, right? And that is one thing that every single automaker is currently suffering from, is the growing pains of all this tech in these vehicles. Me personally, I think that every single automaker should take a break from integrating new tech and just focus on making what they have added so far more robust and more reliable. One of the brands that actually seems to be doing this, which is very surprising, is Land Rover. If you look at the Defender, that vehicle was released for the 2020 model year, and it has had some updates. Like 25 was an update, but all the most of like the updates to the Defender, other than like slight, you know, oh, new exterior color or new package this or that, most of the updates have been changing software and hardware with stuff inside the car. Like a good example is with the screens. They used to completely just not turn on like this, kind of, and now that's not really an issue. So funny that Land Rover, right, brand known for reliability, sarcasm, is the one that's actually kind of doing what these other automakers ought to be doing. So the Silverado is a very nice pickup truck. There's a ton of packages, and when it comes to value, like, it's really hard to not pass up one of these Silverados, because when you look at the value per dollar, it's much better than Ford and Chevy. Or Ford and Ram. We're in a Chevy. Goodness gracious. So you look at like a LTZ, right? You get an LTZ and it'll have more features than the equivalent Ram and Ford at a lower dollar amount. So the value proposition is just a lot stronger. I mean, look at this, for example. This has a big V8. It's got diff locks front and rear, premium shocks, camera rear view mirror, 360 camera. It's got all the features, and it's less money than a Raptor. That's, and I know people say, oh, the Raptor's not in the same category, but like, you look at the build and everything, it's actually pretty similar in terms of quality and everything. So, and the ZR2 is obviously not the best example of value from Chevy. The best example would be like a Trail Boss Custom with the diesel, or like an RST or an LTZ. But yeah, it's a nice truck. It drives really well on road. Off road, you know, the ZR2 is kind of the way to go. And unless you're willing to spend a little bit of money in shocks, because those Rancho shocks, they're not horrible, but their performance is definitely a little bit on the lackluster side of things for an off-road oriented shock. Practical advice in terms of what to order, what to get package-wise, and all of that. What I'd say is I would just completely avoid the 4-cylinder turbo altogether. It's just not worth it. You can get vehicles with the 5.3 and the 3.0 diesel at a slightly higher price point than 2.7 turbo vehicles. and it's worth it. It's 100% worth it. You'll appreciate it. Not just the performance, but just like I said, that's that engine's great in the Colorado. In the Silverado, not so much. Now, when it comes to engines, it's kind of tough because they are working on the lifter problems. Some 25s apparently have been fixed, right? But it's like, well, time will tell in terms of how permanent that is and if people are going to still have issues here and there. I do think the diesel is the best powertrain to go for, but the problem is you have to be able to drive that powertrain long distances on a regular basis. You have to be able to put at least once a week, and I mean bare minimum is once a month, you know, doing a 100-mile stretch, full, you know, driving, no stopping, right? You got to be able to do that with that powertrain. And if you can, it's going to treat you well for the most part. You can still got to deal with DEF and all of that. Again, the emission stuff is killing diesels when it comes to reliability and all of that, but that powertrain's great. With this tech stuff, my advice is the least amount that you can get, the best. Now, I know that people don't want like the base gauge cluster that's not digital, but at the same time, this is great while it's working. If it doesn't work, then it's like, who cares? This seems to be less problematic than the infotainment system. It's the infotainment system that seems to have most of the issues, and the more baseline Silverados have a smaller screen that's like a little square. If you are okay with that screen, that will be far less problematic. I actually haven't seen any issues with the smaller screen. It's all been this version, this bigger version. That's why I picked out this truck for today's video. So that's kind of my advice. The least amount of tech is going to be the best. The diesel's the best. And so I actually see, like, in terms of Silverado lineup, the truck that I see is kind of like the best truck to go for is the Trail Boss Custom, because it gives you some off-road capability, it gives you the diesel, it's more simplistic interior. I understand it feels dated and this and that, but it also saves you quite a bit of money. It's a good looking truck on the exterior. It's the all you need and nothing you don't need package, and I think that's going to be the one that's going to be the most reliable long term, because it's kind of, you know, the Trail Boss is slightly beefed up, so the components and everything, I don't know, it's a nice setup. Let me know your thoughts on Silverado reliability, and let me know your thoughts on packaging, but I think that's kind of the way to go. If you have to have more features, an RST or an LTZ is kind of a nice way to go too.